everyone, Christina here from Sheridan Art and Designs, and today we're going to be making the Mandalorian Flak vest. This one is loosely based on Bo-Katan's, and I am using the Shawnock Studios pattern. I'll drop the link to their website below. I did make some slight modifications to the pattern, so I will walk you through those really quick before we get started. So the first mod that I did was I made this bottom band. In the pattern it's 2 pieces, but I didn't want to have to seam it on the sides, so I just extended the pattern piece and made it all 1 piece. The other thing that I didn't do that's on their pattern is that they have kind of a quilted look to the shoulder patches and the leather inserts here. Because my leather already had a design on it, I chose to skip that part and the batting in between, which gives you that like loft when you stitch on it. But I already had a pattern on mine, so I didn't want to stitch over the top of that pattern, so I just skipped the batting and the quilting part of it and just used my flat leather instead. It worked great either way. Just remember that if you do add the batting in, you'll have a little bit more thickness in those areas. So if that's something you don't want, you can always skip those parts. You just won't have the stitching detail. But like with mine, my leather has a texture to it. So if you have something like that, you might not need the stitching detail. So that's up to you. And then I changed the shape of this front stitching detail just slightly to go with the theme of mine better, which is also not a big deal. You just draw your own lines on and stitch over the lines that you draw. So you can draw them in any shape you like and just stitch over the top. I believe that the decorative stitching is in the pattern, but I chose to just forego it on the side seams, and I just did it where I wanted it. So again, totally up to you. The only other change that I really made was that I used just about 1 inch bias tape for the arm and neck size so that it's a little bit deeper. The pattern says to use 1/2 inch, which you could get away with, but I thought it was a little bit too shallow for the amount of layers that I was going for. The other thing that I'll walk you through in the video is that for my structure on mine, I wanted it to be nice and stiff so that when I put the armor on, it's not going to sag or pull too much on the fabric. So I fused coutille for my structure on mine. So coutille is a fabric that's usually used in corset making, and it creates a lot of stiffness and body and structure. So it is a little bit stiffer than your average material. It can be a little bit tougher to like pin through and that kind of thing, but I thought for this project it would be a great structure. So I just used coutille, and I walk you through the video how I fused that to our outer, much the same way you would use like a fusible interfacing. So you decide what level of structure you want for yours. You can certainly use just a fusible interfacing, a heavyweight if you like, but I had some coutille, so I thought I'd use that instead. So that's about it. With that, let's get going. Hi everyone, so unfortunately I made our whole tutorial on our Flak vest, and then we lost some of the video on it. Some of the video got corrupted, so unfortunately I am missing some steps in our video. So I'm going to try and explain to you the steps that we missed, and hopefully it all comes out clear enough that you can follow along once we pick back up. The steps we missed are pretty simple. They're just those beginning few when you put your kind of side pieces together, and when I talk you through what structure I used for the Flak vest. So we'll start there. Your Flak vest is going to be the piece, the soft piece as part of your Mandalorian kit that holds your chest armor on. So you're going to attach your chest armor to the Flak vest. So you do want there to be a good amount of structure in your Flak vest, because you don't want your Flak vest to start sagging or to pull or to gape when you put your chest armor on. So you want it to be able to bear the weight of the chest armor, essentially. So with that in mind, what I did was I lined my Flak vest with coutille. I happen to have this white coutille around. Coutille is often used in like corset making and things like that. It's very stiff and it holds structure very well. So you can see like that's not really drooping, right? Like that's gonna hold its shape. So how I got that in, I didn't line it with coutille. I used it as more of an interfacing layer. So I took my normal pieces that I had cut out and then I cut a second set of them out of the coutille. So I cut all of the pieces except for the shoulder pad and the lower band because I wouldn't need the structure in that. So the shoulder pad's gonna go over the top of pieces, so you don't need to add that extra layer of coutille there because it's already, the structure is already gonna be built in with the pieces that are underneath it. And then the lower band kind of just goes around the bottom and I want that to have a little bit of stretch to it. So I didn't put coutille in there. But otherwise I cut the front, the back, and the two sides and the side back all out of coutille as well. And then I took a heat and bond, or you could use a double-sided fusible interfacing, anything that's got stickiness or glue on both sides. And I ironed on, you know, I fused with the heat and bond the coutille to our self fabric, our cotton twill fabric. So I ironed on to the cotton twill a layer of heat and bond, and then on the other side I did the coutille so that they were all one piece at that point. So it was just a one fused piece, one side cotton twill, one side coutille. And then I just used those as a single piece in my construction. You'll see that later in the video, but I just treated them all as one piece, and then I did have a separate lining. So you can see, and you'll see the lining in the other video, but I just lined it with a black cotton so that you wouldn't see any of the white coutille showing through. But that's how I did that with the structure. And the other steps we missed were just the very first steps of construction. So what you'll see is that the side, you know, the upper side front and the side front go together, and then the back and the side back go together. And that's really just following along, matching your notches, right sides together, basic sewing stuff. The only thing that I will mention that's a little bit tricky about this, especially if you use my same method or if you're using a really stiff interfacing, is that the back seam here has a curve. And when you attach the side back piece to the front, or side front piece to the front, it also is a curve. And if you have something really stiff like the coutille, getting those to curve can be a little bit challenging, and the coutille so thick it can be challenging to pin through. So my tips on that are just to go really slowly in your machine, match them up at the ends, and then just go a little bit at a time, curving that piece as you go, and it will come together in there, but just go a little bit at a time. And curve it as you go instead of trying to pin it all before you get to your machine, because you'll create a lot of tension in that seam, right? So you just want to stitch a little bit and then curve it, and then stitch a little bit and then curve it, and you'll get it along there. Don't worry too much about it, but that can just be the big challenge there. And then the other thing to think about now is if you want this decorative stitching on your flak vest, when you put those two pieces together is when you should do that. And how I do that is I set my needle all the way to the left, and then I aim my presser foot right down that center seam with my needle all the way to the left, and it'll create that seam. And then you go back over it with your needle set all the way to the right, and it will create the other side seam, right? So your presser foot's going down the middle of the seam, but since your needle's offset, it'll stitch the same width on both sides. So that's the easy, quick way to do that. So think about what kind of decorative stitching you want and put that in now before you put the bottom band on, and before you put the binding in, and before you close the side seams, because it'll lay flatter for you now. Versus if you're going back after you put the side seam in, it'll be harder to lay that piece flat. So hopefully that's all clear, and you guys can manage through that without me showing you exactly how. I'm, again, sorry about the lost video, but sometimes these things can't be helped. So just put together your side fronts and your back, and then I'll jump back in the video before we close this side seam up when we're putting our shoulder patch on, okay? Okay, so you can see we've got both of our sides, we've got both our backs all assembled. I left the side seam open so that I can lay it flat. And then all I did with our shoulder patch was just turn under the two sides. You don't have to worry about this piece or the short sides as much because they're gonna get caught into the binding for the arm and the neck. So you just have to turn under the two long sides so that they have a nice finished edge. And then I'm just gonna lay that on here according to the markings from the pattern, and make sure that the neckline kind of matches and the sleeve matches. And then I'm just going to do 2 top stitches on either side of those, you know, on the long edges to keep that down. And then I'm just going to put our side seam together, and then we're ready to move on to our bottom band, which will go here. And then it's just zipper and binding after that. So we are getting close to the end, but yeah, just 2 top stitches on your shoulder pieces, and then we'll put our side seam together. Make sure that you do the shoulder patch first so that it'll lay flat for you. Otherwise, you're gonna be really struggling to get it through the machine, especially if you used coutille like I did, where it's really stiff. So just do that first and then do the side seam, and we'll come back. Okay, so what I did was I put together the lining, which is basically taking the same exact steps you just did to put the flak vest together, do it with the lining pieces. The only difference is this side front piece. In the pattern, they made it one piece instead of doing that top and bottom piece, which makes it easier to just throw the lining together. I took the same amount of seam allowances. I pressed all my seams open, and I just used 100% cotton for this lining. You could line yours with whatever you like or not line it at all. That's totally up to you. I just want to prevent some of the wear and tear on the seams and the coutille, so I am going to line it with just some black cotton. And that also prevents this white coutille from showing anywhere by mistake or whatever. Just lining it with the black is fine. So now I put it wrong side out on the dress form, and you want to do wrong sides together. So what you want to do is so if this is wrong side out, then you want to put your flak vest right side on, right side out. That way your 2 wrong sides are facing. Okay, so lining and then your flak vest. So that way the wrong side of the lining and the wrong side of the flak vest are gonna go together. Now all I'm gonna do is take this over the machine, and I'm gonna run a stitch so that the lining and the flak vest are together. I'm going to take our normal seam allowance is about 5/8 inch. So I'm gonna go inside of that. I'm gonna go about a 1/2 inch, I think. And I'm gonna run it all the way down the center back seam, around the bottom, and then up the other side of the back seam. That should be enough to kind of keep it in place. If you want to, you can also baste around the neckline and around the shoulder seams. Because I'm using coutille, it's kind of hard to like hand sew through it. It just is annoying and it takes a long time. So I'm going to probably bypass that, but if you don't baste it there, just make sure when you're binding those edges that you're catching that lining in there on your first stitch through. But for now, I'm just going to do down the center back, all the way around the hem, and then up the other side on the center back at about 1/2 inch seam allowance. And that should be enough to keep your lining in there. And then the next thing we'll do is put our lower band on, okay? Okay, so I've put my little band on. The only other thing that I did was I folded my center backs. So that line that you marked on the pattern is your center back line, and then you should have a little bit overhanging on either side. I just did a double fold, so I folded it halfway and then on that line so that they're both here. I folded it that way because I'm doing a zipper instead of Velcro. If you're doing Velcro, you're gonna wanna leave that tab and that's where your Velcro is gonna go. I'm gonna do a zipper here, so it can come up to the edge here. So that's the way I did that. And then I just, right sides together on your band here, all the way around the hem. And then I left myself just like 5/8 inch off the side. And I'm gonna take my second band piece and then right sides together on that. I'm gonna place it right over the last one we did and just do the lower edge. So don't stitch here where you stitched before, stitch it to itself, because then we'll flip it and stitch on the inside on the next step, okay? So I'm gonna go stitch this second piece onto this band and then I'll come back and show you how we flip it. Okay, so you can see that we have this other band that we just stitched right here on the end. And now we're just gonna flip this second band down. And before I flip it, I like to clip my corners there just so you don't have a bunch of extra fabric there. And then you're just gonna flip that corner right side out. Okay. And obviously go press this before you do anything else. But once we flip both of our corners, we're gonna have a nice little band. Now the next step, once you press, is to just flip this to the inside, and then you're gonna take this little tab that you have left over, it should be about 5/8 inch, and you're going to flip it down so that they match on both sides. And you're gonna do that all along the inside, and then you're gonna stitch right along that same seam line so that it hides in here. Now you can machine stitch it like I'm going to do, or you can also whip stitch it with by hand, and that will hide it as well. But just keep it right along that same stitch line. So we take this off, you'll see we're just going to flip this other little band up onto that stitch line where we stitched the first one from the inside, and then tuck just 5/8 inch down so that it's nice and finished there. And then you're just gonna stitch all along that seam all the way around, and that will give you that nice finished band. And then you'll just have to do either your Velcro or your zipper. So that, and then the bias tape around the neck and sleeves as well. So I'm gonna go finish off this bottom band, and then we'll come back for, I'll probably do the zipper next, okay? Okay everyone, so there's just 2 things left. You can see we put our bottom band on. The only thing left is the bias tape around the arms and neck, and then the zipper. I'm gonna try being the keyword, to set this zipper back a little bit, just so this back fold overlaps slightly, so that you can't see the zipper pull at the end. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna sew the bias tape on the neckline up until maybe 1 inch on either side, just so that I can pull that back if I need to get that zipper in, and then lay it over the top just so it finishes out nicely. So I'll stitch that down first, and then I'll lay the zipper in, and then I'll come back and just finish out those little tabs. The way to finish out these bias tape with a finished edge is to, once you lay it on, and I used these little clips because it's too thick for pins right now. It really is a struggle to get pins through it. So I just clipped them on, and I used 0.875 wide single fold bias tape. The instructions on this pattern say to use 1/2 inch bias tape, but I found that that was just like not quite enough coverage on either side. And so I wanted to make sure that we were catching, you know, the lining in, and you know, in certain areas you got like 3 or 4 layers of something that you're getting in there. So I just went up a size to the almost 1 inch bias tape. And it was enough to just, 1 pack was more than enough to do the arms and the neckline. But to finish these, I recommend pinning it in place or clipping it into place, and then leaving yourself just a little tail, because you can clip those at the end. But once you get to your starting point again, and I'm going to start on my arms on the underneath, because if it's not quite as pretty as the rest of it, it'll be under your arm and no one will see it. So start there, but then you just fold this end under a little bit, and and then you will just run your same top stitch. That way you get this nice finished edge. That's all it takes, just a quick little fold under, and then finish out that stitching. And if you get to the end, I always leave myself a little bit of room, because when you're stitching, you never know, something shifts a little bit, it ends up taking a little bit more than you thought. Whatever that is, leave yourself a little bit just so that you have room to adjust. And then at the end, just stop right there, and then you can trim it down to as far as you want, flip it under, and finish out your stitching there. But this will just take one top stitch to catch both sides. Since it's folded over, you can just stitch it once close to the edge here on the top, and it'll catch the underside and the top side all in one, sandwich it together, so it's just one stitch. You don't have to do, you know, the top and then fold it under. You can do it all at once. Same thing on the neckline, but like I said, I'll just leave like an inch on either side just to get that zipper in first, and then I'll finish that edge. So I'm gonna go do that, and then we'll come back for final looks, okay? As you can see, we got our bindings on and our zipper in. I did manage to hide it pretty well, so I'm happy with that. And that completes this. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and drop us a comment below if you're making your own Mandalorian cosplay. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.